There's actually no clear separation between the brain and the nervous system, but it's actually the same thing. And the brain/nervous system is constantly making predictions about our experience. Those predictions actually inform what we experience. There are ways that you can impact the predictions that the nervous system is making. That is something that you have agency over.
Are you in the middle of the rainy season there at the moment in Costa Rica?
You know what? It's actually been very sunny most of the time.
Okay.
I think the intense rains are more like October, November time. So yeah, it's kind of like, don't tell anyone, but I don't, it's not really rainy season yet and there's no people. So,
Okay. Because I hear so many competing things in some of the research I've done. Some people are like, rainy season, but yeah, seems to be okay. I'm glad that's your experience as well. Wonderful. Okay, cool. Well, I'm so happy you're here. And welcome to the Humble Mind podcast. Wonderful to have you around again. Today, I'm very excited to have Jonny Miller with us. He is, among many things, the host of the Curious Humans podcast. He's also the founder of the Nervous System Mastery Program, which is how I came upon you originally, which is, an amazing program that helps people build greater emotional resilience, presence, and a sense of calm through bodily science. And one of the things that really attracted me to Jonny's work, and also taking a closer look at what he does, was this beautiful blend of neuroscience, sort of embodiment, and a little bit of ancient wisdom in there as well, to help people to get more comfortable, to sort of feel grounded and feel more connected to things, rather than just get stuck in the monkey mind, in the thinking mind. And he's also been able to work with his fair share of leaders and high profile creatives, teams, businesses around the world. And I'm extremely happy to have the time with you today to talk with us about all these wonderful things.
That's a very kind intro. Thank you, Alex. It's great to be here.
Thanks, man. Yeah, wonderful. So I would love to hear a little bit about how you kind of got into this, and I have read a bit about your story and kind of some of the the elements around there, but also maybe just to start off with the definition, so that everyone is kind of on the same page, because a lot of the stuff you talk about, I suppose, can be said to start off with, or start off in, the nervous system. And, I suppose a lot of people, when they think about the nervous system, you kind of go back to 9th grade biology, and, you start off with the brain and, okay, nerves running down the brainstem. Okay, nervous system, part of the body, so what? Yeah. So how do you normally kind of come at that definition to get someone to, maybe for the very first time, think a little differently about what the nervous system really can offer us and what it does for us?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I think there's a few kind of frames, or a few ways in, that are helpful. One of them is this idea that the nervous system isn't passive. It quite literally is the lens through which we experience reality. And so our experience of life is very much shaped by the nervous system state that we are in moment to moment. And that's kind of one piece. The second piece is that we have agency over our internal state. There's a lot of people that feel like they're kind of a victim of external circumstances that are, impacting how they feel, and that there are actually pretty simple psychological levers and practices you can do to up or down regulate your nervous system state to come back into safety, etc. And I think the third piece is this idea of kind of like rewiring reactivity. Or maybe another way, one way that I think of progress of nervous system mastery is reducing the half-life of reactivity. So going from, let's say something, you get an email from your boss and you're like frustrated or angry for like 3 days, or, for some people it's like 3 weeks or 3 months, this thing happens and they can't shake it, and they resist what they're feeling. And the more that you practice, and I can kind of go into what the skills are, the shorter that half-life becomes. So it goes down to maybe 3 hours, maybe 30 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. And that just is frankly a better way to live. There's a lot more joy, a lot more aliveness, and more confidence and conviction. You kind of put yourself into higher stress, higher stakes environments, because you're not afraid of various things happening, public speaking, all that kind of stuff.
And I suppose also because we're not then at the mercy of that kind of reaction all the time, which seems to then dominate everything else that comes from it, right?
Exactly.
And in a position where we can respond rather than react, right?
Yeah. Like increasing the space between stimulus and response it's actually wasn't Viktor Frankl that said that, but people think it was.
Okay. I wouldn't be surprised knowing his life if he did say something.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much makes sense given his story.
Okay. So why the nervous system then? Why not something like the emotions, or even as far as thinking about the heart or the soul? What is it about, let's say, maybe even the biology of the nervous system, or how it works, or how it regulates the body, and ultimately the brain too, that allows us to sort of start there?
Yeah, well, this is a few things. One, there's actually no clear separation between the brain and the nervous system. It's kind of like all one thing.
Yeah.
So people often have this like distinction, but it's actually the same thing. And the brain/nervous system is constantly making predictions about our experience. And those predictions actually inform what we experience. So we're kind of like walking around with this, so many layers, decades, years and decades of past experiences that are then informing what we're seeing. And so why the nervous system? It's important to know that there are ways that you can impact the predictions that the nervous system is making. So using things like breath or awareness practices, you can very rapidly change the state of your nervous system to change the predictions it's making from I'm scared, this is a fearful situation, to I'm grounded, I'm calm, and I'm relaxed. And I think for me, one of the big insights was that is something that you have agency over. So that's why the nervous system, and it makes for a nice bridge between neuroscience and between the worlds of clinical understanding and also spirituality and altered states of consciousness and meditation practices. And I like to bridge both worlds. I'm interested in the intersection between the two. I actually just renamed the Curious Humans podcast The Inner Frontier. Updated it yesterday because it felt more true to what I'm exploring. It feels like the nervous system is kind of on the inner frontier or part of the inner frontier, and this terra incognita, this like unexplored landscape of our interior states, I think it feels to me like the most exciting frontier, in the same way that in like the 15th century, you could look at maps of the world and there'd be like these here be dragons, kind of like blank spots. For me, those blank spots are now in like our own experience. And so that's what's interesting for me to explore.
Beautiful. Yeah. There's so much and so many layers to that. How did you get yourself into this? What was the road you took to kind of use, or rather to kind of, I suppose, learn all of these different, tools and kind of practices and things that maybe, would have otherwise remained hidden to you, had you chosen other things or had other things happened?
Yeah, well, for me, and I think this is a pattern that I definitely see, was it really took like a crisis. And, for a lot of people on doing inner work to some degree, I'd say 90+%, something happened to them, whether it was burnout, whether it was a health crisis, whether it was a breakup or losing a loved one, like it was in my case. For me, it was losing my former fiance who had bipolar, and she ended up taking her own life. And that experience kind of like self-combusted the life and identity that I'd constructed for myself and the plans that I had for the future. And so that was my entry point into this. And specifically, I think it was the fear of becoming someone who didn't process their grief, and who, I'd seen adults who were like almost like shells of humans. They were these like husk of a human being. There's this like lack of aliveness and deadness that you can kind of see on people's faces when they haven't metabolized challenging experiences. And so I was afraid of that. And so I kind of went like all in to, I was like, okay, I know I'm not particularly in touch with my emotions growing up in the UK. Masculine, we're not like, we're like, like an archetypally repressed culture. And so I was like, all right, well, what happens if I fully explore this?
Wow. Wow. And I suppose there's a level of courage, I suppose, that goes with that, because often with powerful emotions like grief and things that happen around also feels like it's happening to us.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a little while to eventually realize, maybe sometimes years, that it could actually be happening for us, and there might be a whole new bunch of doors that it's opening around us as well. So was there something that helped you to I suppose, in using your words, realize a sense of agency around that this is terrible and I've had something really, 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 really sad happen? How can I kind of change the perspective around it so that it ends up being a different story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The phrase that came to mind in retrospect is courageous curiosity. And I think that is really key. And at the same time, if you or someone had said to me, look, this is happening for you, I'd like punch you in the face. It's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you can't go straight to that perspective.
Mm.
I mean, I think on my behalf, it was because there was sincere curiosity in there as well. Like I'd already been interested in
Mm.
questions around what it meant to live a good life, and from a much more intellectual place.
Mm.
And yeah, I think it was just a combination of things, and just feeling drawn. It's hard to explain, but there's like a sense of like, oh, this just feels right. This
Mm.
feels like what I'm meant to be doing.
Yes, yeah. That's and once again, that sort of truth appears first as a feeling. I felt that as well with certain things that have happened in my life, whether it might be talking and helping people grow communities, or whether it's music or being a father. These things kind of become facts later, but first they're
Yeah,
feelings. They're sort of
totally.
like, oh my God, I know. Yes, no more doubt. That's it. I know. And it's
Yeah,
so
exactly.
immediate and so true, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And part of that feeling, I think it's like it's almost like you know what will the word that comes to mind is integrity. And I think if
Mm.
you think about like what move in this moment would lead to greater integrity, there's usually a sense that you kind of know what that looks like.
Yeah.
And often it takes a lot of courage to follow through.
Yeah. And funny you said integrity, because I just wrote a piece a few days ago on this idea of integration. And I looked up, as I often do, I just love looking at the meaning of words. And integrare from Latin
Oh,
means to make whole. Yeah.
yeah,
How
yeah,
cool is
yeah.
that?
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's honestly what a lot of the like inner work is doing. It's like it's finding the exiled parts or the emotions that we've repressed or the
Mm.
things that we don't want
Yeah.
to own or look at and
Mm.
inviting them back in, literally welcoming them back into the
Mm.
whole of our being.
Mm.
So I think it's a beautiful word.
One of the things that I can't remember exactly where I've seen you say it. It might have been on the podcast or perhaps on your site, but this idea of state over story, where what we kind of perceive as reality around us is filtered, through our nervous system state, right? Can you expand a little bit more on that? Because it's such a, when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, I totally get that. That's true.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, people listening can probably relate to this as well. Um, our minds, I think of our minds as almost like a PR team inside our head. Like they are kind of like reporting after the fact to
Mm.
justify how you're feeling. So if you're in a state of contraction and fear, you will find reasons or stories to confabulate why you're feeling that way.
Right. Yeah.
And we do this all the time. And conversely, so what a lot of people do in the personal development world is they'll try and that they'll say affirmations or positive thinking or if I just reframe this, everything will be okay. But you can actually intervene at the level of the nervous system. You can change your state using one of these practices. And when your body is feeling expansive, relaxed, kind of collected, then the stories and perspectives that you have will naturally emphasize that, and it's almost like a positive loop. So it's not that. So I kind of distinguish between top-down approaches and bottom-up approaches. And I don't, I'm not saying that all top-down. Like I love meditation, for example, but I think that the bottom-up approaches are just heavily underutilized, and that in general, kind of tuning up your state and getting into a place of felt sense integrity before making big decisions or anything. It's like good hygiene maybe.
Right. And just so we're all following, when you say bottom up, that means starting from the body, starting from the sensation. Is that?
Yes. So one of the neuroscience like nuggets that I think is useful is that we have 4 times more afferent neurons than efferent neurons, and afferent neurons go from the body to the brain. Efferent go from the brain to the body. So there's like a super highway of data coming up from all of our sensory input, and like a single lane of traffic going from our mind to our body. So I think there's more leverage in a way to impact.
How do you? I'm curious when you have these conversations with people who are receptive. I'm obviously one of them, and so I'm loving this, and I know a lot of people listening and part of the community are as well. But I'm curious as to how you kind of frame or position some of this to someone who either is just a little bit less initiated to kind of thinking about sensations and sort of starting with the body, because we all pride our brain, don't we? We all, or rather what we think the brain means to us in terms of a status and our mental state and how intelligent we are and how intelligent we think we are and what that means and how we can, attract the right partner and work in the right job because we're clever, because we're educated, because we're intellectual, because we live from here, up from the neck up. So, and some of something you said, which I really liked, was this idea of sort of feeling. I think you said feeling the future, or feeling kind of what's around us, rather than just being stuck in an intellectual loop around it. So I'm curious as to how you start these conversations with, for lack of a better word, maybe a naysayer, someone who's maybe prides the mental state, and anything outside of the mental state is something to be feared or something to kind of, look down on almost. How do you see that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Yeah, I think it's in some ways it's like the question, and most of the time, it's something really simple. Sometimes I'll be like, well, how are you feeling? Like, how's that working out for you, basically? Right. And for some people who are, especially, people kind of like young and hungry in their 20s, they won't be interested in this stuff for a good number of years. And often it comes back to the suffering piece, that some degree of suffering generally needs to be present, or at least in your awareness, to be receptive to this, because you have to realize the limits of that head only way of approaching the world. And so I like the frame of feather brick dump truck as an analogy, in the sense of, for some people, it's almost like they just need to be like tickled by a feather in some way. Like, oh, something doesn't feel quite right, and that's enough for them to get curious. Other people, it's a brick. Maybe it's a breakup. Maybe it's like waking up feeling exhausted. And for a lot of people, unfortunately, it's the dump truck. It's like full-blown health crisis, like massive, like fired from the job, everything goes tits up. And they're like, oh shit, like I need to completely rethink my mental models of the world. And that's often, ironically, people are most receptive, but also they have the least capacity to learn and to engage in this stuff. So, often it'll actually be like 6 to 18 months after a big crisis where they've kind of found stable ground again, but they're like, okay, I don't want to do that again. Like, don't want to repeat that. Like, what do I need to learn? And a lot of it comes back to paying attention to the feedback coming from the body, from those like 4 lanes of traffic. And the more that you listen to that, the more that the body kind of teaches you in a way.
Yeah, I suppose we all learn from suffering or some level of pain in some way, and sometimes that kind of that, especially if we're talking about high performers or those with, in this sense, a kind of a high pain tolerance where you can take a lot of stress and you can take a lot of shit and you can kind of somehow manage a lot. It also means that when the final dump truck hit happens, then it probably destroys so much of the capacity to kind of rebuild at that point, which ends up working against you in that way. So it's
yeah. I mean, I think of people like in the public sphere, like David Goggins, Alex Hormozy is I think a good example of people who are like absolutely blitzing with the kind of head-only approach, but they also have enormous capacity. And I think that at some point, whether it's a year, 3-5 years from now, there's going to be like an atomic bomb explosion when they self-combust. And I've seen signs of it with Hormozy. But I think people just have different windows of tolerance, right? Some people can sustain that way of operating for 10 years, and because society rewards them for it with money and status, then it makes sense until the pain outweighs the rewards they're getting from that way of operating.
Yeah. It's also something that kind of indirectly brings in this sort of the relationship that I think we have, which is still a forming relationship with AI as well. I don't want to talk too much about AI now because it seems to derail so many conversations about really important stuff. But at the same time,
I think it's really important.
I mean, it's interesting because once again, it's not so much about the AI. I think I always look at kind of like, what does that say about us and where does that leave us? Kind of how can we be looking at ourselves in different ways, and so much of that big capacity, that kind of high stress tolerance, especially around high performers, leaders of businesses and companies, and maybe even people in sports, where you're needing to, function at such a high level for such a long time, so consistently that you end up needing to kind of become more like a machine in a way, because that's what you're rewarded for. And that's where the kind of the other bigger things like meaning and purpose begin to, I suppose, form those stories. Like, this is what the world needs from me. This is what I'm getting rewarded for. So this is what I need to be. This is who I am then, and then identities start to kind of play into that. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And I think there's also many performers at the highest level who have a different operating system. I think of someone like Josh Waitzkin, Rick Rubin, folks like that.
Yeah.
Are much more in the frame of listening, and there's like a genius that comes from this kind of like expanded presence and this deep capacity for self-reflection that they have as well. So I have this kind of working model of like personal development 1.0 and personal development 2.0. Personal development 1.0 is it's the move is of empowerment. It's for people that feel like they're victims of their life. They gravitate towards David Goggins, Hormozy, Jocko Willink, those types of people, because they're like,
no pain, no gain.
Yeah, no pain. Like, you can overcome your suffering through sheer willpower and just like thrusting yourself into the world. And that is a very important move for a lot of people. And a lot of people are in that place of like feeling helplessness. But that gets to a point where you have to completely let go of that way of being and enter the more, I think of it as like the self-unfolding kind of paradigm, where it becomes more about listening, letting go of control, opening, surrendering. So it's almost like in some ways the absolute opposite, but you can't, it's hard to go straight from, you almost like have to go through these different phases. And I think as a culture, we're kind of realizing the edges or the inherent limitations of the kind of 1.0 approach, and the kind of like backlash against optimization culture that we're kind of seeing right now. There's more talk of optimizing for like aliveness, which I love, as opposed to external metrics or quantified self stuff. So I think it's really interesting. I think we're at a very interesting kind of time culturally. Definitely.
And I think human beings are very good at denial and avoiding surrender. Where there's something in the messaging that's hardwired to kind of appeal to, part of our brain or kind of our psyche that is about that overcoming and that just do more is more kind of thing. And I suppose it definitely has its uses and maybe different periods in life when that, is not just appealing as a message, but there's a toolkit there and I can use it and I can actually get things done. Great, look at me. But I suppose when there's a pain or a suffering, kind of tolerance, then the tools need to be changed, because ultimately you either make that choice or circumstances make that choice for you, where, okay, I've got to do something different, and I may need to surrender here. And surrender is hard work.
Yeah. Well, I think this is where my initiation of that came through grief. And grief is something where if you resist it, you're fucked. You're completely fucked. And it's the same as with, I think about it like a deep tissue massage. If you get like someone that goes like deep into your like trigger points with an elbow, if you tense up against that, you just get annihilated. And it's the same with grief. The only way that you make it through in one piece is by allowing yourself to be obliterated in some ways, or the parts of yourself get obliterated by the intensity. But there is this immense aliveness and freedom on the other side. And if you taste that even just once, there's almost like no going back. And I think for me, I then started to apply that to other emotions as well. And that was how my journey kind of ended up unfolding.
Aliveness. I'm in love with that word. Love that. Yeah, very evocative. So how can we begin to kind of start exploring these tools? Say I'm someone who's maybe going through some suffering, or maybe it doesn't always have to be, world-ending suffering. What if I'm just a little unhappy? I'm kind of in a relationship where it's like, it's not really working out. I'm kind of wanting to change my job, where there's that kind of just uncomfortableness, a dull kind of ache of life. What are one or two things I can start to notice or to sort of do to start to just change my relationship to those things? Where can I start? How can I start thinking about that, or stop thinking about it?
Yeah, in some ways that kind of like dull ache is the most frustrating place to be, because there's not enough momentum or fuel to kind of make significant changes. So for me, like, I like to frame things in terms of skills. And so I think the three major skills for this path, no matter where you're at, are interoception, self-regulation, and emotional fluidity. And starting with interoception, and I'll define that as basically your ability to listen and track your inner landscape, everything that's happening internally. How in tune with that are you? How much are you listening to it? How much are you paying attention? And that's often a great starting point, because if let's say you're someone who is feeling that like dull ache of kind of Thoreau's words, what was it, like quiet desperation, that kind of sense of like
the English way.
yeah, exactly. Keep calm and carry on and hate your life. Yeah, fuck, it's depressing. Yeah, like that. Like if you really tune in, like if you really interocept and tune into what that feeling is like that, or tune into the longing that you have within you for something different, that in itself will take you to where you need to go. So I think sometimes it's actually just about connecting to the ache or the longing and then following that. The self-regulation piece is important, because as you go into this path, you will likely uncover things which are challenging to be with. And so having practices for encountering intense emotions, but being able to stay grounded and kind of in your body and not disassociate or shut down or collapse in the face of that is really helpful. And for me, that's generally just breathing practices and grounding practices.
When you say grounding, just because sometimes that might be the very first time someone's heard that, just really quickly, what do you mean by grounding?
Yeah, great question. So essentially, activating the parasympathetic nervous system is another way to put it. We have more parasympathetic nerve fibers in like the lower part of our belly, for example. So by breathing down into the lower diaphragm and literally bringing our awareness down here, or sometimes into the legs and the feet, it actually has this effect of like, and you can probably do this right now. Like I'll like put my awareness down. I'm like, oh, I feel grounded. My spine's a little straighter. I'm like, feels like gravity's a bit heavier and there's more capacity there. When we start to get overwhelmed, our awareness tends to be up here. We tend to breathe shallow. It's kind of like a panting, and that's sometimes the throat tightens up, the face will tighten up, the awareness kind of narrows. And
Yeah.
so what you want to do is like expand that, bring the awareness further down, bring the breath further down. And then this practice is like humming, alternate
Mm,
nostril breathing.
mm,
There's a whole host of things you can do. But
mm.
finding something that works for you that you can do anywhere and having that in your kind of like toolkit is like really
Yeah.
helpful.
Brilliant. Mm,
And then, so, and the third skill is the emotional fluidity, and that is, it takes a lifetime to learn or to master, let's say.
okay.
But that is basically, in a nutshell, it's welcoming the full spectrum of human experience. And another way of
Mm,
framing it is like, how are you relating to the emotions and things that are arising? And to the degree that you are resisting or judging or repressing those things is really the degree to which you suffer, and the degree to
phew.
which you can welcome and like love everything that's arising, everything from rage or helplessness
Mm,
or any emotion that you can name, grief, terror, even, like the emotional experience. And this is what's fascinating, is it's not the emotions themselves that suck. Most people think, oh, when I feel terror is actually fear, and terror is a good example where that, in my experience, is actually on the same spectrum as awe and rapture. And if you
wow.
can open up to, and this is like a level 10 really challenging skill and practice, and it takes a lot of practice, let's say, but you can open up to terror and fear, and it becomes wonder, awe, and
Mm,
rapture, and this
mm,
like
mm, mm,
transcendental experience.
mm,
And the same is true with all emotions. Like the negative ones are just the way in which we contract against them. And once
mm.
you learn to kind of unwind that tension, it opens up into beautiful experiences.
It, it reminds me of a poem by William Blake, who himself was an amazing, enlightened artist so long ago. And joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with a silken twine. Um,
Mm.
and
I haven't heard
yeah,
that before.
yeah, it's
Will
beautiful.
you say that again? That's beautiful.
So joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with a silken twine. It is right, it should be so. We were made for joy and woe. And when this we rightly know, through the world we safely go.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it
Beautiful.
is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's once again that spectrum, opening yourself up to the fullness, the
Yeah.
aliveness
Yeah.
of
Exactly.
whatever may come, allows both spectrums to, or both sides of the spectrum to be unlocked. And no matter how much we might game or want to think our way through trying to optimize for the one side, like you said, personal development 1.0,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's the light and the dark, the medicine and the poison that we
Yeah.
carry. Yeah.
There's so, I mean, honestly, I think poetry is actually a beautiful doorway into a lot of this work. There's one of my favorite poems is from Rilke, and the lines
Oh,
that I
love
wanted
him.
to share are, yeah, here we go. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final.
Oh,
And it's like, yeah, like that's it.
yeah. I love
The,
the, I,
the poets get it.
yeah, yeah, totally. I love the word final there as well, because,
Yeah.
yeah, wow. And I think you mentioned something about poetry, and the last few years I've really kind of gotten into poetry and reading poetry again, definitely with a different set of eyes compared with the schoolroom, even though I did enjoy it then as well. But, you learn to see things differently. And something like poetry as an art form is just so beautiful, because there's the words and then there's the music,
Hmm. Hmm.
and the music reaches you before the words can, or a lot of the time, can kind of
Yeah.
land in what they mean, and the
Yeah.
music is
Yeah.
sort of supporting something. Sometimes it's a different conversation entirely. So it's just, yeah, such an effective way of making you realize things, making you feel things.
Yeah. Yeah. David White says that poetry is language for which we have no defenses.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That's another guy I'm trying to get on the podcast. One day he'll return my calls. Yeah, yeah, beautiful. Love David White.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So those are the three introspection, emotional fluidity. Sorry, and the second one?
So interoception, which is somewhat different
Interoception,
from
sorry.
introspection. There's obviously overlap. Self-regulation and emotional fluidity.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious as to, I mean, part of what I'm doing with Humble Mind is to kind of ultimately is to lean into community consciousness and what that means when we've got like minds and like hearts, I suppose, too, around a particular topic or an idea or a challenge we're trying to solve, something we're trying to learn about. And there's something that we can kind of tap into that's greater than the individual at a different level when people are all kind of laser focused on putting their energy and their efforts and their attention into one thing at the same time. Similar in a way to how, what it's like when you're meditating in a group of 1,000 people. There really is something palpable in the room, as you probably have experienced. So I'm curious as to if you have any thoughts or any little ruminations on the role of community in all of this and how it can help us to maybe reinforce some of these lessons that we can learn for ourselves, and how that maybe even shows up in the body, even shows up in the nervous system as well.
Yeah, it's a beautiful question and a beautiful inquiry. What comes to mind is, I think one of my favorite metaphors for the nervous system is this idea of like a human instrument. And nervous system regulation is like a fancy way of saying coming back into tune and learning how to bring the instrument. And actually, there's some really interesting work by Dr. Michael Levin, who basically argues that we are like thousands and thousands and thousands of kind of mini consciousnesses which come together and create the illusion of like a single self. And so what I think about the path of this work is really kind of like bringing those parts that are exiled or whatever, like back into tune so that we can kind of play a true note through our own instrument. And so the role of community, I think, is both that when the same way that when you have multiple instruments come together that are in the same key, that are all in tune, there's beautiful music that can get played and the kind of the overall effect gets amplified. And the second piece is that it's easier to like, if you are, and we have words like, oh, I resonate with that person. Like if you meet someone who is, in tune in some way, it's easier for you to kind of be met in that sense.
Totally.
And our nervous systems also work in this way. Like we are constantly co-regulating with each other. And there've been studies around like HRV entrainment, for example, is one where like pet owners will, their hearts will literally entrain with their dogs. Or when people sing together, their HRV literally kind of reaches a level of entrainment, which can be measured and tracked. And our hearts are literally sending these electromagnetic waves that go, I think it's up to 30 feet outside of our heart. These waves are sent. And it's like, we don't think about it. We don't see it. So that's why we discount it, but it's happening and you can now measure it very easily. And so I think when it comes to the role of community, it's that dance of both doing the work to bring yourself into tune, but also finding others which you resonate with, and then making music together. And and that is all. There's also a deep intimacy in that as well. And the other challenge with our culture right now is we so over index on our kind of like primary partner relationship, and we expect them to meet all of these various needs.
Be our everything.
Yeah. My wife is currently pregnant, and one of the reasons we're here in Costa Rica is to live in community, because we realize that it's very hard to raise a healthy functioning human if there's just two of you. People manage it, but I think it's so much easier when there are many, many adults around you, to support the kid, and to obviously to share resources. But I think it's really how we were designed. And we've just kind of like in the last 200-300 years kind of like veered away from that. And I think it's part of the reason, it's definitely contributing to the ridiculous statistics around anxiety and depression and mental health challenges that we're seeing today.
Yeah.
So I think it's such an important inquiry. And at the same time, it's also hard. Like the conflict arises and relational challenges come up and people get
Mm.
triggered. The more intimate you are in community, the more of these parts of you rise to the surface.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the opportunity there is they can be like alchemized and
Yeah.
integrated
Mm.
if handled skillfully. And the challenge is if there isn't that relational toolkit in place, then it can just create disconnection and
Yeah.
rupture, or rupture that doesn't get healed.
Absolutely. It can be confronting. It can be a very confronting experience because a part of community as well is, like you said, intimacy, absolutely. But also, whether it's a function of that intimacy or not, there's also a sense of proximity as well. You know, there's a sort of a closeness that you get, whether it's virtual or in person. I mean, you get different types of communities, different structures, different levels of intimacy, different amounts of proximity as well, which ends up being a self-regulating kind of mechanism itself. But it's interesting because that then that you can't help then but be yourself. You know, I think the beauty of a community is that it becomes that self-regulating mechanism where the people who shouldn't there over time get rooted out. You know, you it will find a way to kind of spit you out if you're not kind of getting the vibe, or if you're not, you know, because you pose a risk to the integrity of that community, that structure, that organism. So it has to find a way to kind of, you know, emphasize the things that keep it together and de-emphasize the things that, you know, risk pulling it apart. So in a way, I suppose it becomes its own nervous system. You know, it becomes its own sort of intelligence system as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. And there's obviously a lot more to say around. Like one of my friends just wrote about Maple recently, the monastic academy, in quite like a damning context, just accusing it of having like cult-like tendencies. And I think there are various things to be aware of in terms of. I think one of the key distinctions is, does the community exist to kind of empower the people who are
Yeah.
part of it, or is it more of like a power over? And I think
Yeah.
that's like a really interesting, almost like proxy for like the health of a community, or almost like, is it like an ethical cult as opposed to a culty cult?
Yeah. 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 Jonestown. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Just because it's kind of around us and so ubiquitous anyway, you know, we're talking about, you know, human intelligence and body intelligence here, but there's also, you know, artificial intelligence, obviously. And I'm curious, when you have these sorts of conversations with people, maybe even going back to high performers and, you know, often the ones who might be suffering the most, who need it the most, you know, is there a sort of a way that you look at the human premium? This is something I've been thinking about quite a bit. So what I mean by that is, as machines become more and more intelligent, exponential technologies around us can kind of eat up more and more of where we used to think human beings had their domain. You know, that's changing every single day. In some ways, it's scary. In some ways, it's exciting. But at the same time, we're having to kind of almost change our own goalposts, rewrite our own textbooks about where that human value, where that human authenticity level is. Do you have an insight or a sense of, you know, 5 years, 10 years into the future, maybe even tomorrow, it doesn't really matter the time, but what we'll be optimizing for, what we'll be still craving or wanting from each other, where we might be living in a world where nearly every need is met, nearly every piece of hard work is now being able to be done, and it's not needing us. Where do you think we will be needed still?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really great question. And I do have thoughts. I think firstly, I think the mainstream view around intelligence is actually very limited and
Oof.
almost human centric. I think that actually what we'll see is there is an enormous landscape of possible types of intelligence,
Yes.
and AI will be expanding that and our conception of what the categories of intelligence and what they even are. And I think we will be inventing new types of intelligence that we don't
Yes.
know exist today. Just in the same way that we're learning more about whale intelligence and dolphin intelligence and
Right.
octopus intelligence. There's many, many types that, and we tend to overemphasize or prioritize like IQ, like human type intelligence. So I think that's like one piece of the puzzle. I think the optimistic case for AI that I see is that a lot of the I mean, you even see this today, like pretty much anything that can be defined as like an SOP, as a system in process, can now be done to some extent by an AI agent. In 2 or 3 years, everything will be able to be done by an AI agent. So it's like anything that can be put down into an SOP is probably not going to be done by a human. And so what I think the exciting opportunity there is to become more fully ourselves and to kind of ask like what is the unique gift that I was put here to give or to create, and how can I be more me. So it's no longer a kind of game of competition, because what does that even mean when the
Yeah.
cost of production goes to zero for everything. So then the question becomes more a game of like how do I increase my aliveness, and how do I increase my capacity for self-expression, to kind of bring forth, to go back to musical instrument, to bring forth the music that is like mine to play. And that starts with knowing how to be in tune. And then I think that humans will increasingly seek and long for experiences of intimacy and communion. And a large part of that will, and in order to have that, we will need to up level our relational skills, our emotional fluidity, and these, I guess, like emotional intelligence and wisdom as well. Like those are the kind of skills which, like healthy discernment and taste. These are the things which I
Yes.
think will be increasingly sought after. I don't think it's going to be a smooth transition in any way, shape, or form. And I think we'll see both sides of this playing out. We'll see the people that do go in that direction, and we'll see the people that really struggle to adapt.
Mm.
But it's it's exciting. It's like I love the Tim Urban idea of like, if humanity was in a great book, like we are reaching the point where there is this like enormous cliffhanger. Like you want to turn the page and find out like,
Yes.
like what
Yeah.
happens next. Like
Yeah. You can
it's a
feel it.
very
Yeah.
exciting time to be alive for sure.
Mm. I'm still kind of lingering on phrase you mentioned there. You know, being born to play the music that is mine to play. You know, and I love that, and I think that that's really true, because I think we're also going to really be wanting more and more. We'll be seeking more of those experiences where I think it's almost as though, and in what you think about this, like the better AI becomes at mimicking what we can do, you know, and how it might even be nearly impossible to ever tell whether I'm speaking to a human or not. I mean, that's not even a far, flung idea. That might be happening right now even. The more I think we'll find different justifications and stories that we'll tell ourselves around the fact that nobody's not good enough. Nobody, I'm still looking for the human touch in some way. We'll
Yeah, yeah.
kind of, there's a denial element there, I suppose, too. But there's also the fact that we also crave things that are not perfect, but we want them to be authentic, Like, for example, I'll notice if someone sends me an email and, they put a colon instead of a comma or something stupid, or they might leave out, the E at the end of the word or something like that. I have a theory that we will be zoning in on those sorts of tiny little everyday stupid errors, so much to the point where it'll actually give us pleasure. It'll actually give us like oh, great, you're a human. And there'll be like a connection point there because of that error, because of that authenticity through the error.
Yeah, I mean, this already happens if you look at like, like pottery, for example. Like, it's way more
Right,
expensive to buy a hand-thrown pottery with lots, which isn't even properly round, than
right,
like
right.
a perfectly machine-made piece. I think that's definitely true. And then I think the other possibility, and I'm sure this is already happening, is co-creation with AI, where we find, this. The word that I like in this term comes back from the chess world, which is like centaur, where it's like human AI teams actually
Mm.
were better than just AIs or just humans.
Centaur.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Like it's
nice.
got, I like the kind of mythical framing, and I
Yeah.
think that it's also like AI. Like we've always used tools to enhance our creativity. I mean, you think of musical instruments; they are
Yeah.
like incredible I spent I went to a ceremony a few months ago, and I was just like, I was in awe of a cello. There was this incredible virtuoso cellist player. Is that how you say something? A cello player, and I was just like in awe of the cello and what a like magnificent creation it was. And I think that we're going to create AI tools that will allow us to play music in a way that wouldn't have been possible, and music as a matter, like writing, arts, everything, that wouldn't have been possible. So I also see it as an enormous amplifier. You know, people will be able to create Hollywood quality movies just from a dream that they had last night. You know, it's like,
Yes.
And so there is this extraordinary kind of Cambian explosion of creativity that will be possible as well.
And then once again, just to bring in what you said, that's where the discernment and taste factor then comes in to maybe kind of balance and regulate that. Because, you know, if we look at, you know, if those sort of, you know, last night's dream becomes tomorrow's movie, and that ends up, you know, playing on the circuit, you know, there's no chance that that's going to be making millions of dollars necessarily. Most of it will probably be shit, you know. And so there is where the taste and the discernment and the kind of the sense of real creativity is still going to be a premium. In some way, it'll be differently defined, but we'll still aim for it in some way.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think you're definitely right that we'll be wanting more kind of like raw, almost like shaky camera type, authentic experiences, as opposed to perfectly polished, whatever, things that are becoming more popular now. But I think it's just, there's so many interesting questions here. And I think also, you know, I like the frame of AI as like an intimate mirror. And there are ways in which people are using AI for really powerful kind of inner work practices and parts work and reflection and somatic processing. And that's also happening. So I think it can accelerate and amplify kind of whatever is already within you. Just in the same way that I think, you know, money doesn't necessarily, money and power don't make people bad people. They just amplify what's already there. And I think AI is kind of going to do the same thing. It's going to amplify what is already there. And so, it's it's going to be wild.
I'll need to get you back on for another episode, especially if we're going to talk about money. Wow, my God, I'm still doing a whole lot of work on that. That's a crazy
big frontier for a lot of us.
That's a crazy energy currency, isn't it? Yeah. Just a last question to kind of end us off, for someone who might have been listening to our conversation and is intrigued about not just what we're talking about, what you do as well. Is there somewhere where they can, you know, a good starting point where they can check out and not just learn more about what you do and how you might even be able to help them, or, you know, a couple episodes of, you know, related conversations, but also like where to start? How can I even start thinking about, you know, trying to feel better?
Yeah, so in terms of resources online, the best place to go is nsmastery.com, which is my website, and I've done my best to curate. There's a free self-assessment there that's probably a really good starting point to give people a sense of the different kind of nervous system pillars, to get like a benchmark of where you're at and areas to improve. So that's kind of a really good starting point. There's also a 5 to Thrive kind of free email course that's there for people. And then my podcast, which was called Curious Humans and is now called The Inner Frontier, there's a lot of like more deeper dive episodes for people that want to go deep into certain aspects of what we've been talking about, and much more as well. So I say those would be the two places, nsmastery.com and then the Inner Frontier podcast, which will be called that as of tomorrow.
Fantastic. Well, you hit it here first then. Lovely. Yeah. Great, man. Well, I really want to thank you for your time and your generosity today. Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully we can do it again, and maybe even in person next time.
This has been such a pleasure. Yeah, I really appreciate the sincerity and the heart in the questions. It's beautiful.
Thanks, mate. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Humble Mind. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're curious to take a look at our community, if you're not a member, you're missing out. Make sure you head to humblemind.co to check out more and to see what we're up to. I look forward to seeing you there. Until next time.